Imagine you're holding like the historical resume of the ultimate perfectly disciplined government employee. You know, you're scanning through it and you see things like calendar management, astronomical observation, filing municipal reports on time. It's all very, very structured, very bureaucratic.
Right, it's the definition of a rigid life. I mean, looking at a profile like that, you expect to read about performance reviews and, maybe an early pension. You definitely don't expect to see a history of mystical battles.
No, exactly. But then you flip that resume over, and on the back, scribbled in some kind of glowing invisible ink, it says, by the way, I'm also a supernatural hybrid who commands an invisible army of demonic spirits.
Yeah, and who can transmute living matter with his mind.
Right. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are taking a custom-tailored look at excerpts from the Celestial Sorcerer, Legends of Abe no Seimei, specifically Volume 2, The Supernatural Legend. Now, if you remember our previous look at Seimei, we focused entirely on his role as this brilliant historical scientist and government official in 10th century Japan.
But the mission for today's deep dive is entirely different. We are looking at the genetic reveal.
Yes, the genetic reveal, because the sources show he wasn't just a really smart human.
No, not at all. And this is the crucial pivot for anyone studying this figure. Because when you examine the historical records, you find the bureaucrat. But when you look at the cultural memory and mythology, you find something else entirely.
Right, the folklore.
Exactly. This shift from history to folklore is what truly cemented his legendary status.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't get remembered for a millennium just because you were exceptionally good at tracking the lunar calendar.
No, you definitely don't. You get remembered because the culture eventually decides you are, fundamentally not of this world.
Precisely.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the story of how he supposedly acquired these powers is completely wild. Usually you read these ancient myths, and it's a story of a guy finding a magic staff in a cave or studying under a waterfall for 20 years.
Right, the typical hero's journey stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But this is quite literally an origin story about his DNA. And it all starts with his father, a man named Abe no Yasuna.
Ah, the legend of the white fox. It is just such a foundational piece of the Seimei mythos.
It really is. So his father, Yasuna, is out walking one day and he saves a white fox from a local hunter, which, sounds like a standard fairy tale setup, right? The animal is grateful, maybe it leaves some gold on his doorstep.
But the fox doesn't just bow and run away. To repay the debt, this fox actually transforms into a beautiful human woman who calls herself Kuzunoha.
Wow.
Yeah, and they end up falling in love, they get married, and they have a child. That child is Seimei, though. His childhood name was Dujimaru.
We see that animal bride motif in a lot of global folklore, but applying it to a real, documented historical figure, that does something totally unique.
It really does. It grounds the mythology in a tangible bloodline. It provides this biological justification for his later genius.
It feels exactly like a modern superhero origin story. He isn't just, going to a wizard academy to memorize incantations out of old books. The magic is literally in his biology.
Woven into his blood.
Right, woven into his blood. But because we are dealing with ancient mythology, this superhero origin takes a remarkably dark and tragic turn.
It does. The breaking point occurs when Seimei is just 5 years old. Picture a small child looking into a reflection, perhaps a polished mirror or a still pool of water in the garden.
Okay.
And he sees something he was never meant to witness. He sees his mother's true form reflected back at him. He sees her foxtail.
A 5-year-old kid. Think about how traumatizing that would be. Your mother is suddenly revealed to be a literal mythical beast.
And in the framework of these supernatural legends, revelation is a one-way street. Because her true nature as a kitsune, a fox spirit, has been exposed to human eyes, the immutable rules of the spirit world dictate that she can no longer live in the human realm.
The illusion is broken.
Exactly. She is forced to abandon her husband and her young son and return to the forest.
But she doesn't just vanish into thin air, though. Before she leaves, she writes a poem on the wall. We actually have the translation of it in the source material. It says, "If you love me, come and see me to the forest of Shinoda."
It is incredibly bleak. She is bound by these ancient rules to leave her child behind. It's a profoundly sad departure.
Yeah, and it leaves a permanent psychological mark on the boy, but she leaves him with much more than just a poem on a wall. She leaves him with her genetic legacy.
Which fundamentally alters what he is capable of. Because he is half Kitsune, he inherits these very specific gifts.
Right, like he gets an incredibly long lifespan. The legend claims he lived to be 84 years old, which, if you were living in 10th century Japan, makes you practically immortal compared to everyone else.
Truly. He also inherits the ability to understand the language of birds, which is fascinating. But the most critical gift is this inner eye.
The inner eye. This innate biological ability to simply see invisible spirits, or oni, just walking around the human world.
What's fascinating here is how this origin completely recontextualizes his entire existence. His profound connection to the spirit world is not something he sought out. It is inherited trauma and biology wrapped into one complex package.
He sees the invisible world not out of academic curiosity, but because his mother was a creature of that world.
Precisely. The very genetic trait that allows him to perceive these spirits is the exact same trait that tore his family apart.
I'm trying to square this circle, though. If you have this inner eye, and you are constantly seeing a layer of reality that no one else can see, filled with dangerous, chaotic demons, how do you not completely lose your mind?
Especially a guy who goes on to become a highly disciplined calendar maker for the emperor.
Exactly. Like, how does he cope with that?
Well, you build a system of absolute order. If you are constantly perceiving chaotic entities, you have to develop a mechanism to manage them. You basically have to enforce your own bureaucratic discipline onto the supernatural world.
Which explains why his magic system is, like, so unique. I mean, having the biological ability to see invisible spirits naturally leads directly to how he built his system to control them.
Right.
When you picture a powerful wizard today, you probably imagine someone waving a staff, shouting a spell, and throwing giant fireballs to blow things up.
Very flashy. But Seimei's magic isn't about raw, explosive destruction. The material describes it as being based on two core concepts: transmutation and binding. The sources tell us that Seimei's immense power terrified the person closest to him. It alienated his own wife, forcing him to hide his spirits under a cold bridge just to maintain a fragile peace in his own house. His mastery of magic eventually made him a target, leading directly to his brutal assassination by Yoi. And his very existence was the result of a biological inheritance that permanently drove his mother away when he was just 5 years old. So if a man this uniquely brilliant was so deeply isolated in his own home and literally murdered for his knowledge, is the legend of Abe no Seimei really a triumphant superhero origin story? Or is it actually a subtle, deeply tragic cautionary tale about the profoundly isolating cost of seeing a world that no one else can see?